Hi, everyone. You may remember that we've been studying through Judges 6, 7, and 8 with the story of Gideon. We're going to be wrapping up that series here today by looking at Gideon's fall. I wish that we could end Gideon's story on a good note. Last week is so much victory, so much of him overcoming all this adversity and achieving so much victory through God. But here we see things go downhill very quickly. So let's start with the prayer, and then we'll look at Judges 8. Our God and Father in heaven, we thank you for this day. Thank you for always being with us and watching over us. Thank you for keeping us safe and healthy. We pray that we would always glorify your name in all that we do. And we pray that we would put you first always. Please help us to put our trust in you and to remember that you are in control. Please be with us as we try to serve you and to keep our faith, even in this time of uncertainty and difficulty. We know that we are Christians no matter what is going on. We are looking forward to the time that we're able to be together again. Please be with those who are suffering from sickness or from anxiety or from loss of jobs and loss of income. We pray that you would be with them and that you would relieve their burden. In Jesus' name, amen. So as a brief recap, in Judges chapter 6, we saw how God called Gideon out of obscurity. He was a man of no particular note, not anyone worth remembering or worth noticing, yet God called him to deliver his people from the Midianites. Gideon was resistant to that at first. He needed some help, he needed reassurance, and he asked for multiple signs. And God was willing to give those signs to him to show him that, yes, I will be with you. Yes, I will give you the victory. This victory will come not from your strength or the strength of the people, but from my strength. And Gideon was emboldened to do what he was called to do. And he took those good early first steps of tearing down his father's idol, of standing up to his own community, and showing that he and his people would serve God. In chapter 7, we saw him take bigger steps in raising up an army to go and meet the Midianites. It was a fairly impressive army for the short amount of time that he had and not being able to draw people from all over Israel. But it was nothing compared to the mighty Midianite horde that was on the way. And so as they're looking down into the valley where the Midianites are, they're all struck with fear, yet God says, you have far too many men. Let's pare this down. And God systematically reduces Gideon's forces until there are only 300 men. This is a laughable number against the whole of the Midianites, yet God still gives them victory. And Gideon's faith is shaken a little bit in here, but God reassures him again, has him go down to the Midianite camp and to see this vision, or rather to hear the dream that one of the Midianite soldiers had, and to be reassured that yes, God is still going to give you the victory, even with this small force of 300 men. And the victory was overwhelming. They surrounded the Midianite camp. They used a little bit of subterfuge to confuse them. They all held torches and blew trumpets and pretended that they were launching a surprise attack. And the Lord struck the Midianites with confusion so that they all attacked each other. And they suffered heavy losses without the Israelites even needing to draw their swords. It was an amazing, overwhelming victory. As the Midianites scattered and ran off, Gideon and his men pursued after them. All along the way, he's calling for more men of Israel to join him in routing the Midianites and to take back the land that had been taken from them. This is the largest victory possible. Even just dreaming, I can't think of a greater victory that God could have given the Israelites. And we're going to see that it is brought to completion here in chapter 8, that God gives them everything that they could have asked for, yet things still go downhill. Let's read in Judges chapter 8, verses 1 through 9. We're reading from the ESV, Judges 8, 1 through 9. Then the men of Ephraim said to him, "What is this that you have done to us, not to call us when you went to fight against Midian?" And they accused him fiercely. And he said to them, "What have I done now in comparison with you? Is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the grape harvest of Abiezer? God has given into your hand the princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. What have I been able to do in comparison with you?" And their anger against him subsided when he said this. And Gideon came to the Jordan and crossed over, he and the 300 men who were with him, exhausted yet pursuing. So he said to the men of Succoth, "Please give loaves of bread to the people who follow me, for they are exhausted, and I am pursuing after Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian." And the officials of Succoth said, "Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give bread to your army?" So Gideon said, "Well then, when the Lord has given Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, I will flail your flesh with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars." And from there he went up to Penuel and spoke to them in the same way. And the men of Penuel answered him as the men of Succoth had answered. And he said to the men of Penuel, "When I come again in peace, I will break down this tower." Remember, at the end of chapter 7, Gideon had called in the rest of the nearby Israelites to help rout the Midianites. These are the people of Ephraim and Naphtali and Asher and the rest of Manasseh. Basically, anybody who was close enough to join in and to chase after the Midianites who are running. The goal is to not let them get back to safety, to make this victory so complete that Midian would never come and bother them again. And here already we see how duplicitous the people are. The men of Ephraim were upset. They're starting to argue with Gideon because they didn't have the glory of victory that Gideon did. Now, if we think back just a little bit, remember that there were not very many people who were lining up to join up with Gideon, who wanted to be a part of this battle. He initially had a decent number of men, but most of them left because they were too afraid. And presumably there were many others who never even joined the army in the first place because they were too afraid. But as is often the case, once there is victory, there's a long line of people who are upset and who feel like they've been left out, even though they lacked the courage to join in the first place. Gideon, remember, was not being very selective about who could join the army. He was asking for anyone and everyone. It was God who was weeding people out after a time. But to listen to the men of Ephraim, it was as if Gideon's trying to hog all the glory for himself, which really is not the way that happened. But Gideon actually handles this pretty deftly. He reminds them what they were able to do. He says that Zebah and Zalmunna are still in your hand. You have an opportunity here to seize these kings, and there'll be great honor and glory in that for you. And this seems to smooth everything over. He pushes them to think of the present task instead of what they missed in the past. And so Gideon and his army pass through two other Israelite towns as they're pursuing the fleeing Midianite armies, Succoth and Penuel. Now, they'd been traveling some time, and they're trying to go quickly. They're chasing after some scared Midianites, but they're exhausted, and they need food. So they ask the people of Succoth, "Can you give us bread so that we can be rejuvenated and continue on in chasing them?" And the people of Succoth say, basically, "No, we don't think that you're going to be successful, or we haven't seen the fruits of this yet. You haven't already caught the kings, and so we don't owe you anything." I'm not sure if this was an expression of fear or just ingratitude in saying, until we actually see you do it, we will give you no support. Now, Gideon's not asking them to do anything particularly difficult. He's not asking them to join in with the army and to pursue with them. He's not asking them to be placed into any danger themselves. All he's asking is for them to fill a support role. And support roles are very important. The army was necessary. The army needed to pursue after them, but the army also needs to be fed. And the people who feed them are very important. Yet the people of Succoth were not willing to help even in this small way. And Gideon was very angry at them. He says, "After I've caught them, I will come back and I will flail your flesh with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars." And that is an interesting turn of phrase that I don't know that I would have come up with on the fly there. Gideon evidently has a flair for the dramatic, although we'll see that he actually does take that fairly literally when he does return. So Gideon and the army move on to the next town along the way, Penuel, and he gets the same response from them. "We won't help you." And here it seems that they are putting their trust in this tower that they have, that they're afraid that somehow the Midianites are going to resist this pursuit, that they're going to strike back, and that maybe they will be punished by the Midianites for helping Gideon and his army. They're trying to kind of play it both ways. They're not going to help or hurt either side, and maybe they can just be neutral. Gideon is displeased with them as well, and he says, "After I have caught these kings, I'll come back and I'll tear down your tower." So let's continue on in verses 10 through 12. Judges 8, 10 through 12. Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor with their army, about 15,000 men, all who were left of all the army and of the people of the east, for there had fallen 120,000 men who drew the sword. And Gideon went up by the way of the tent dwellers east of Nobah and Jogbehah, and attacked the army, for the army felt secure. And Zebah and Zalmunna fled, and he pursued them, and captured the two kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, and he threw all the army into a panic. Gideon finally catches up with these two kings. And when he does so, when he has them cornered and he's able to attack them, he doesn't even hesitate. Now remember, he's had so many victories up to this point, but he still has an overwhelming task here. He's been able to accumulate some more men, but Zebah and Zalmunna are not exactly defenseless. They still have 15,000 men. They've kind of rallied. They're no longer running scared. They feel fairly secure that they're going to be able to resist Gideon's attack. But Gideon doesn't even hesitate. He charges forward directly into battle, defeats them, and even as they flee again, Gideon pursues, routs the entire army, and captures the two kings. So this is a very persistent victory, that Gideon is not willing to hesitate, to pause, to leave anything undone. He's going to do every single thing that he can to have a complete and total victory. That persistence is a very good thing, actually. Let's continue on in verses 13 through 21. Then Gideon, the son of Joash, returned from the battle by the ascent of Heres, and he captured a young man of Succoth and questioned him. And he wrote down for him the officials and elders of Succoth, 77 men. And he came to the men of Succoth and said, "Behold, Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you taunted me, saying, Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give bread to your men who are exhausted?" And he took the elders of the city, and he took thorns of the wilderness and briars, and with them taught the men of Succoth a lesson. And he broke down the tower of Penuel, and killed the men of the city. Then he said to Zebah and Zalmunna, "Where are the men whom you killed at Tabor?" They answered, "As you are, so were they. Every one of them resembled the son of a king." And he said, "They were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As the Lord lives, if you had saved them alive, I would not kill you." So he said to Jether, his firstborn, "Rise and kill them." But the young man did not draw his sword, for he was afraid, because he was still a young man. Then Zebah and Zalmunna said, "Rise yourself, and fall upon us, for as the man is, so is his strength." And Gideon arose, and killed Zebah and Zalmunna, and he took the crescent ornaments that were on the necks of their camels. So Gideon returns to Succoth and Penuel, and he repaid them as he said he would. There's a bit of a euphemism employed in verse 16, where he took the briars, the thorns of the wilderness and the briars, and he taught the men of Succoth a lesson. That seems to be not a classroom lesson. That seems to be that he publicly whipped them in the town. Remember that he captured a young man of Succoth and got the names of 77 of the key men and leaders of the community to know exactly who to hold responsible for them not helping Gideon and his army. And he was not afraid to punish them and to show them that they should have supported him. This is a very strong punishment. Then he goes to Penuel, and he tears down their tower. This maybe is a less personal punishment, but in some ways it is the harsher one, of much more damage done to the city, leaving them in a much more vulnerable state. So there's a question we can ask of why do they get different punishments? Why does he treat them differently? It's possibly due to some details that we don't have given for us. I'm inclined to believe that the people of Penuel put trust in that tower, but they believed that they were so fortified and so strong that they didn't need Gideon's help, that it didn't matter what Midian was doing because they were strong enough to withstand any attack that Midian might offer. So there's no need for them to take sides. There's no need for them to be beholden to anyone. We can just be confident in our own strength. So it's possible that Gideon is striking them where they feel that they are strong. Another possibility is just that Gideon's kind of losing control here, and he's just getting angrier, and so he's striking with more of a vengeance. And that's quite possible as well when you see how this chapter progresses, that Gideon gets worse and worse as time goes on. Whatever the case is, he punishes both of these cities very harshly in showing them that they should have supported him, they should have listened to him, and making sure that everyone knows that Gideon is not to be trifled with. So then he has these two Midianite kings, and he brings them before him to be executed. But first, he extracts a confession out of them. He asks, what did you do with the men of Tabor, or who are the men of Tabor that you killed? And all that the kings are able to tell him is, they looked like you. They bear a striking resemblance to you. And Gideon says, yes, that's because they were my brothers. And you killed them. You're responsible for their deaths. He says, if you had left them alive, I would have spared your life. And I don't know if that's true or not, to be honest, but that's what he tells them anyway. If you had spared their lives, I wouldn't have a reason to kill you. But because you have wronged me personally, you will lose your lives today. And he tells his firstborn son to get up and to kill them. His son is still a young man and is too afraid to do that. I can imagine that being a very overwhelming situation, being a young man sitting there and told, here, execute these two kings. We can think of that in the abstract, but I mean, put yourself in that position. Could you take a sword and strike two powerful men who are defenseless at that point? Yes, they're captives. Yes, they've worked great evil against Israel. But you still have to be able to muster up some kind of violence to be able to do that. And this young man is simply not able to do that. And so the kings, with their last words, basically taunt Gideon, saying, if you're going to do this, do it yourself. If you're such a strong man, show your strength and kill us with your own hand. And that's exactly what he does. He gets up and he executes these two kings. Now, you're probably getting the picture of, I don't know, Gideon's kind of straddling a line here to me. He's doing what God had told him to do. He's delivering the people from Midian. He has pursued this very persistent victory. He's taken back the land that Midian had taken from them. He has killed these kings. He has won a victory that is so great that it's hard to imagine Midian even being able or wanting to muster up a force to attack Israel again. If 300 men can kill 135,000, how many men do we need to kill Israel? We just don't have that many. So he really has won. Yet, in my mind, Gideon seems a little unhinged here. He seems a little out of control. and he is making things very intense very quickly. And that strikes me as unusual because he started out being hesitant, and now it's like he's going overboard. And maybe if he had stopped here, everything would have been okay. Maybe this would have just been God's judgment against Midian, but this is exactly what God intended for Gideon to do. But Gideon doesn't stop here. Things get worse, and we see him fall. Let's read Judges 8:22 through 32. Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, "Rule over us, you and your son and your grandson also, for you have saved us from the hand of Midian." Gideon said to them, "I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." And Gideon said to them, "Let me make a request of you. Every one of you give me the earrings from his spoil," for they had golden earrings, because they were Ishmaelites. And they answered, "We will willingly give them." And they spread a cloak, and every man threw in it the earrings of his spoil. And the weight of the golden earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, besides the crescent ornaments, and the pendants, and the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian, and besides the collars that were around the necks of their camels. And Gideon made an ephod of it, and put it into his city, in Ophrah, and all Israel whored after it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and to his family. So Midian was subdued before the people of Israel, and they raised their heads no more. And the land had rest 40 years in the days of Gideon. Jerubbaal the son of Joash went and lived in his own house. Now Gideon had 70 sons, his own offspring, for he had many wives. And his concubine, who was in Shechem, also bore him a son, and he called his name Abimelech. And Gideon the son of Joash died in a good old age, and was buried in the tomb of Joash's father at Ophrah of the Abiezrites. So after the glory of victory, the men of Israel try to set up Gideon as a king. They say, "Rule over us, and your son rule over us, and your grandson rule over us. Be our king. You have given us so much victory. You have delivered us from these impossible odds. You should be our king." And Gideon does this makes this noble gesture where he says, "I will not be your king. I will not rule over you. God will rule over you. God alone is our king." And that is so noble and completely untruthful. He in no way believes what he is saying. And maybe you see it in the reading and maybe you don't. There's a lot of pieces here that show that Gideon is not being very forthright with them. Even though he is saying the right things, his actions afterwards show that he's happy to act like a king in everything but the name, at least at first. So, immediately after he tells them, "No, I won't be your king," he says, "Let me make a request of you. Give me, each one of you, a small part of the plunder. Just the gold earrings out of whatever it was that each soldier, each man, was able to grab." Now, this is a small tax, a small portion of the plunder, and they were willing to give this to him. They didn't put up any resistance. They didn't have any problem with it at all. And even though this is a small request, it ended up being 1,700 shekels of gold. Now, depending on the exact weight of a shekel that you use, that is somewhere between 38 and 77 pounds of gold. That is a lot of gold. No matter what time in history you are in, and no matter who you are, that is a fortune. And that wasn't even all of what Gideon got. He already had a lot of other plunder that he had received just in the course of battle. Now, the people gave this to him gladly. But let's think about what this really is. I called it a tax, and that's not the way that Gideon frames it. He doesn't say, "I'm going to tax you." But is this not exactly a tax? Where the leader says, "Each one of you, each person, each family, give me a small amount of what you have and let me store it up as riches for myself." it's a tax. You can call it a free will offering here, but when a civil leader asks for everyone to give him a small portion of something, it's a tax. That's exactly what it is. And so as much as Gideon is saying, I won't be your king, he's already acting like one in imposing a tax upon the people. I don't know how he got to be so wily that he could say he wasn't a king, call the tax this free request, and get them to believe that that's what it really was. Evidently, he was fairly persuasive, or he was riding on the goodwill that he had gathered from this great victory. But he's able to amass a fortune as a result. This is not the end, though. Gideon takes all of this gold and he makes it into an ephod. Now, an ephod was typically a simple linen garment that the priests wore. It's not ornate, it's not particularly valuable, it doesn't have anything to do with gold, yet Gideon makes this ceremonial version of it. He makes a very valuable version of it. And an ephod was a garment that the priests wore. It was a religious garment. Now, Gideon was not of the tribe of Levi. He was not a priest. But notice what he's doing here. He has imposed a tax, and he's received it. He's now made it into a priestly garment, saying, I am a religious leader. I am your priest. And he's going to put this gold ephod up in his town of Ophrah as an icon, an idol, something. He has imposed a tax. He's declared himself a religious leader. And he's basically made a new capital. So he is deliverer. He is king. He is priest. He is mediator. He is everything. Gideon is the ultimate ruler, even if he won't call himself that. Remember that this is back before Israel had kings. We're still hundreds of years away from the Israelites asking and pleading and begging for God to give them a king like the nations around them. This is still in a time of judges, when God was their king and when the judges helped to arbitrate the disputes that they had among themselves. And Gideon is one of these judges, but in a way, he's a proto-king. He's not literally the first king of Israel, but he sure acts like it here, and in many ways, he is. This golden ephod that he puts up in Ophrah immediately becomes a stumbling block to Gideon, to his family, and to all of Israel. It becomes an object of idolatrous worship. And so we see that for 40 years, Israel has peace. Everything looks good on the surface. Midian is no longer bothering them. They climb out of the despair that they had. They're able to prosper. But morally, Israel continues to fall. The short-lived victory that they had morally as a nation in coming back to God really has now turned into this idolatrous worship. Gideon himself slides further into indulgence. We see that he has 70 sons, which is pretty impressive. About the only way you're going to end up with 70 sons is to have more than one wife, clearly. And he does. He has many wives and many concubines. You know what kind of person has many wives and many concubines? Somebody with a harem. Who has a harem? A king, typically. So here is yet another act of Gideon proclaiming himself as a king, using his status, his power, his wealth to amass a harem and to be able to have all of these sons to continue his line. This harem is a reflection of his excess. He's certainly not trusting in God at this point. He's not doing morally what he should do. He's living in complete excess and indulgence. And then, you might miss this point if you don't have a little bit of extra investigation you've done. Maybe your Bible has a note here. But a seemingly insignificant detail in the narrative is actually very important. Gideon names one of his sons Abimelech. Names were very important to the people back then. These days, we tend to name people based off of what the name sounds like, or maybe it has a family connection, and they did some of that too. But they took the meaning behind names very seriously. And we even see examples of people changing their names or having their names changed by God or by someone else because of some significant event in their lives. Think of Abram becoming Abraham and Jacob becoming Israel. Here we see that Gideon names his son Abimelech. What does Abimelech mean? My father is king. That's not subtle. Not at all. Gideon has not been willing to call himself king. He's not given himself that title, but after some number of years, he goes into it fully. He names his son Abimelech, and this is to show that Gideon was in fact king, but even more than that, it's to give Abimelech a claim to leadership. So you might, if you're reading through this very quickly, congratulate Gideon and say, how nice is this, that they want him to be king and he turns that down. We get some George Washington vibes out of this. I won't be your king. We shouldn't have kings. But this wasn't done very nobly. This wasn't done out of sincerity. Gideon is pulling a long con here. That he's going to wait a long time to actually call himself king, but he is willing to act like one from the very beginning. His intent was clearly to establish his family as the ruling family of Israel. He's come a long way from a man who said, I am an insignificant man from an insignificant family, from an insignificant tribe. Now, he says, my family rules. My family is the head of all of Israel and will be forever. Gideon died with great early success, but having thrown away his trust in God. And we see the lasting consequences as we finish the chapter. In verses 33 through 35, as soon as Gideon died, the people of Israel turned again and whored after the Baals and made Baal-berith their god. And the people of Israel did not remember the Lord their God, who had delivered them from the hand of all their enemies on every side, and they did not show steadfast love to the family of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, in return for all the good that he had done to Israel. As soon as Gideon died, Israel went back to worshiping Baal. They at least had the pretense of worshiping the Lord while Gideon was still alive, though they were also worshiping this icon that Gideon had set up. But as soon as he dies, there's no need to serve God anymore, because their hearts were never really in it. There was no real moral revolution here. Gideon gave them an example of how to take a victory and turn it into a moral defeat, to turn it into an idolatrous fall. He provides them with an opportunity to turn back into idolatry, and they took it. And so they regarded Baal as Baal-berith. And that means the God of the covenant. And what a slap in the face of God that is. Yahweh made a covenant with Israel years before. Said, I will protect you, I will be with you, I will bless you, I will give you a promised land, I will bless the world through you. You need to obey me, and I will bless you beyond anything you can imagine. And if you refuse to obey me, then I will punish you. And all of Israel said, as you have said, so we will do. And now, here in this generation, they say Baal is the God of the covenant. He is the one that we are pledged to. He is the one that we serve. So what did Gideon really accomplish? Sure, he tore down a Baal in chapter 6, but he made bigger and better ones. Gideon's a story of victory, but only temporarily. Gideon is really a sad excuse for a judge, a sad excuse for a follower of God. God was able to use him to bring victory to the people and to deliver them from the Midianites, and there was a temporary peace because of that. But this is all part of the vicious death spiral of the book of Judges. As you study this book, you'll see that Israel just goes downhill. We're kind of used to talking about the cycle of Judges, that Israel trusted in God, then they forgot about God, then things got really hard for them when some nation nearby would come and oppress them. They would cry out to the Lord, a judge would deliver them. They'd trust in God and have peace, and then the whole thing starts all over again. But remember that this is not a flat cycle. This is a cycle that's going downhill. This is a cycle that's really the flushing of a toilet. Israel is going down the drain very quickly as they refuse to trust in God. If you look on to the next chapter, which we're not going to cover here, but I'll just briefly talk about, Abimelech, Gideon's son, ends up being the worst version of Gideon that there is. He learns all the wrong lessons from his father. He becomes bloodthirsty and self-serving and wicked. He kills almost everyone in his family to secure his line, to secure his claim to the throne, even if there's not a literal throne, to secure his claim to rule over Israel. He is an evil, evil man. And this is not a case of a son who has strayed far from what his father taught him. He is doing exactly what his father taught him and taking it to a whole new level. So there are all kinds of lessons for us to learn from this. That yes, God will give us victory if we trust in him, if we serve him and follow him, but it is quite possible for us to snatch defeat out of the jaws of victory just by turning away from God, by taking the credit for ourselves, by being self-serving, by turning to worldliness, by elevating ourselves above God's plans and God's commands. We actually have the power to take the victory that God gives us and to use it as an opportunity for evil for us and for all the people around us, for our family, for our community, for our church. This isn't God's fault. This is our fault. This is what happens when sin reigns. So take the lesson of humility, of remembering to trust in God when things are dire, but also trust in God when he gives you victory. To remember that you still rely on him, that you still need to put him first, that you still owe him your service, your loyalty, your covenant. Yahweh is the God of covenant. Just like he was for the Israelites, we are not bound under that same covenant, but they were, but God has still made a covenant with us today. He has made a covenant for us to follow him, to serve him, to be washed from our sins, and to stand holy and righteous in his presence. If we will do that, we will have victory in our lives, but we will also glorify the name of God. Let us never take that victory and use it as an opportunity for sin. Instead, let us put God first. Thank you, brethren and friends. Take this lesson and use it well.